Hey, thanks. Here we go with another episode of the Fat Guy Podcast. I'm the Fat Guy. Most people just call me Brett. Thanks for listening today. If you're not following us on social media, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Fat Guy Podcast is the username. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, wherever you're listening, wherever you found us, subscribe. Whether that be Apple Podcasts, Google Play Store. What are we on? Spotify. We're on iHeartRadio. We're pretty much wherever you get podcasts, you can find us. And thank you so much for listening today. Appreciate it. Today we're going to be talking about skinny fat, or TOFI. TOFI, which stands for thin on the outside, fat on the inside. Everybody probably knows somebody like this. And now look, there's people who are born with heart murmurs, heart valve problems, other genetic heart issues that cause them to die from heart-related illnesses young. But for people that don't have all of that and they suddenly drop dead from a heart attack in like their mid-30s and everybody's shocked, or their late 20s and everybody's shocked, it's very possible that they were suffering from advanced metabolic syndrome and that they were skinny fat, or what's called TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. TOFI, or skinny fat, is actually more dangerous than being fat. One, because you don't really know that there's anything wrong. And two, because your body has less ability to deal with the insulin issues because there's a lack of fat cells. So, everybody is genetically programmed to have a certain amount of fat cells. So you can't grow new ones. You just kind of genetically have fat cells distributed throughout your body, the majority of them generally in the midsection. But as you've seen people get super fat, they can store fat on their legs, their thighs, their arms. You can see people with back fat, neck fat, head fat. I mean, once the body starts running out of places to put fat in one area, it just moves on and dumps fat in other places. But now there's some people that genetically just don't have that many fat cells. It's an actual condition. And some people would say, oh, God, what a great condition that is. But it's really not. It means your body is way less tolerant of the insulin resistance. So if you take two people, you take one person who has a ton of fat cells, and you take a person with this condition that doesn't have genetically that many fat cells, and they both eat this horribly damaging standard American diet that we all eat that's really high in carbs and fat, and your body just can't deal with it, it's going to kill the thin person a lot faster, the person who doesn't have as many, because their body runs out of available space to store the overload, and then their organs and body just get bombarded with the insulin and the sugar levels, and it just takes a massive toll on them, and then they wind up dying very, very young. Whereas a person who has a ton of fat cells, that body can continue to deal with the overload because the body's trying to process the carbs. All the carbs that it can't use, it offloads and converts into fatty acids, which is stored in fat cells, and it just keeps storing the overload and storing the overload and storing the overload. And so it's kind of dealing with it the whole way. Meanwhile, metabolic syndrome is getting increasingly worse and worse. Insulin resistance getting worse and worse and worse. And we flip back over to the skinny person who doesn't have genetically fat cells to deal with it. They fill those fat cells up really quickly, and now they're just being bombarded with the non-stop overload of the insulin and the blood sugar and the everything coursing through the body, and it's just very, very harmful. So here's the difference. So you can have a person who has a normal BMI, they look skinny or they look healthy. You can't, they don't look fat or anything. And then you can have somebody that's really overweight or obese. Somebody that looks like me. When I walk up towards you, there's no denying that I'm fat. There's just no way around it. So the difference is I'm going to store my fat in what's called subcutaneous adipose tissue. Now, that doesn't mean that's the only place I'll store it, but I have tons of fat cells around my belly and in my thighs and in different places that my body can keep storing all this excess fat, and it'll hold it, and I'll just keep growing, and the fat cells will get larger and larger and larger. Not creating new fat cells, just getting the fat cells that I do have larger and larger and larger and larger and larger. On the other hand, you have the skinny fat person, they are storing their, sorry about that, they're storing their fat in what's called this area inside their gut around their organs. So this is going to be around their liver, it's going to be wrapped around their pancreas, it's going to be interwoven around skeletal muscle, and it's going to be wrapped around their core in there, and it's just really, really dangerous. This means that the skinny fat person is at an increased risk for something called cardiometabolic disease. This is all the heart-related type diseases that come as a result of metabolic syndrome. They have an increased and progressed risk for this, whereby the fat person has a decreased risk in the immediate future, nonetheless, of cardiometabolic disease. They actually, in some ways, they're actually more healthy because they are able to store the excess carbs and convert it over to fatty acids and store it in terms of fat. So it's kind of weird to where the fat people really get blamed for, and look, most fat people are just not healthy at all. I'm not saying that they are, so please don't misunderstand me. But they can be healthier longer than one of these people who does not have the subcutaneous adipose tissue and cells to store all this fat. And so you'll see it on different levels. You'll see people that just look pretty thin and healthy, but their blood pressure's sky high, their blood sugars are sky high, their HDL is way off. They're having all these problems, but they just look normal size when you look at them. They may even look ripped. Some of them even look ripped. And then you have what's called a medium stage, and this would be these people that look thin from the back. Women, but mainly men. Have you ever walked up behind a guy and he looked like he's a normal average size, and then when he turns to the side, he's got this big, bulbous, tight, like a drum looking belly that sticks out? But then if he turns back around and faces away from you, he looks normal size again. That's an intermediate, quote unquote, skinny fat, and that's a guy that has so much visceral fat that's stored and wrapped up and around the liver and the pancreas and the all the organs in the gut area and in that cavity, that it's actually pushing forward and distending that belly out into a forward, awkward looking thing. And you'll find these people can pretty much wear normal size clothes and normal size shirts. Even though they have the big gut, they don't have the width. They just have that sticking out in front. And so they don't wear that much larger than a pant and shirt size than a person their size that's the normal size. It'd be slightly larger, but not unlike a fat person that has to wear like a 4X or 5X. You know, they can go from just a large to an extra large, maybe a 2X or something, but they just look normal from the back. Now, those two types of people are in a lot of danger. They're just in a lot of danger. They're in a danger that comes from all the issues of metabolic syndrome. And we covered all those in the last episode of the podcast. So if you didn't listen to the last episode, what is metabolic syndrome? We go through what it is, how to identify it, and what are the risks of it are. So I highly recommend that you go back and listen to that. And I hope this episode has helped you understand what TOFI, or skinny fat, is. Follow us on social media. Fat Guy Podcast is the username. And by all means, please subscribe to the podcast. You can find us most anywhere. Apple Podcasts, Google Play Store. We're on Spotify. We're on all various different types of platforms, iHeartRadio. And I appreciate you spreading the word. I hope that we helped you in some way. Thanks so much.